And noting everyone's presence back in the courtroom, please have the jury return. The defense may call its next witness.
Please, the court defense calls Dr. Robert Burley.
Dr. Berlin? Please raise your right hand, please.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
You have a chance to get settled here for a minute, Judge.
Okay.
Would you pull that microphone around there?
I have a loud voice.
Dr. Burley, let me get you to introduce yourself to the jury.
Robert, excuse me, Robert M. Berland, B-E-R-L-A-N-D.
And right at the outset, you have a condition that you wanted me to mention.
Yes, I have an inherited tremor. It's called familial benign essential tremor. It doesn't affect the brain, but my hands shake a lot, so you just have to ignore it.
Okay. How are you employed?
I work full-time for the Department of Corrections
Okay, out of where?
at Union Correctional Institute in Stark, Florida.
And what do you do for them?
I provide mental health services.
In the form of what?
Well, I do evaluations for people who are going to be committed to the special facility they have in Department of Corrections for severely mentally ill people, and I also provide counseling and supervision
So you're
for
actually
the inmates.
So you're actually employed by the state, correct?
Yes,
Okay. For a state paycheck, so to speak.
yes.
All right. What's your mode of evaluation primarily?
Say it again?
What's your modality of evaluation?
Well, in my case, I use, you're talking about for this
Yes, sir.
defendant, I use mental health testing, psychological testing, and an interview, and then I check records.
And how many years have you been doing that?
Well, I was originally licensed back in 1977 or 8, and they sunset the licensing law for about 3 years, and then I was relicensed in 1982. So I've done this since 1978.
And what is your educational background?
I have a PhD in psychology from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and I have a year of full-time postdoctoral training at the University of Tennessee with my major instructor, and I have 2 years of half-time postdoctoral training at Florida State University while I was working at the Forensic Service in Chattahoochee. That was from let me think. I worked there in the Forensic Service from June of 78 through I think August of 85. And then I went to the Office of Disability Determinations as the first psychologist they had, and then I told them that I was going to be going into private practice in less than a year, and after 9 months, but they hired me anyway, and after 9 months I went into full-time private practice.
Have you ever been declared an expert in any other competent jurisdiction?
In any other what?
In any other jurisdiction?
Yes.
Where?
Oh my gosh, all over the state and in 10 other states around the country.
Has there ever been a court, to your knowledge, that has ever refused to grant you status as an expert after being properly qualified?
No, not so far, knock on wood.
You're using the MMPI
Yes.
for an evaluation. Explain a little bit about exactly what that is.
Well, the MMPI is a psychological test that was developed back in about 1938. The original MMPI, and then an MMPI 2, a second version, which is exactly the same. It has all the same items as the original MMPI, except for 13 items that were deleted because they thought they had offensive content. And the original MMPI was developed by gathering a pool of about 1,000 items from different sources, textbooks and other clinicians and so forth, and they took from that pool all those items that clearly distinguished between mentally ill and normal people, and they had 3 groups of normals back in the original MMPI. Anyway, those 10% or more that or less that answered in one direction, or 10% or more that answered in the other direction, those items were chosen because they clearly distinguished between mentally ill and normal people, and then they formed what were called scales. They have 10 clinical scales, and the test was originally developed to aid in medical assessment of people, but they found that they gave names to the scales, like schizophrenia scale and the paranoia scale, but they found that different disorders in the same class had the same symptoms, and they found out that the test was very good for defining symptoms but not mental illness. So they renamed the scales 1 through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0, but they kept the old names just to give an idea of what the scales measured.
And you've interpreted these results.
Say it
You've
again.
interpreted these results many times, correct? Thousands of times. Your Honor, I would submit that this is tender him as an expert in the reading of MMPI in psychology.
Any objection or voir dire?
No voir dire, Your Honor.
I do find this witness qualifies as an expert witness in that area.
You reviewed a dearth of materials. Let's back up and tell us exactly how this evaluation process of Mr. Bargo took place.
Well, I met with him in the...
Bargo Jr.
I'm sorry?
Bargo Jr., the defendant.
I met with Mr. Bargo in the Marion County Jail in one of the rooms that they have for purposes of evaluating people, and I gave him the MMPI. I read it to him. Now there's a group of people that say you shouldn't read it to them, that you should use the recorded version, but they don't ever give a reason. And there's research going back at least 50, 60 years which shows that they get valid profiles from one prisoner reading it to a group of prisoners. So I read it to him, and then I asked him a bunch of questions.
Well, but based on the opinion you're about to render, it's not only based on the MMPI, but you reviewed many materials that were submitted to you, school records, health records, medical records,
Yes, correct.
social welfare records, and things like that, correct?
That's correct.
And how does that play in a possible evaluation?
Well, in my opinion, it serves to either verify or disagree with the data that you're getting from the testing and the interview.
It acts as somewhat of a cross-check, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you administer the results to him? I mean, or administer the test to him, rather?
Yes, I did.
And do you feel like that you got valid results?
Yes.
Why do you feel like you got valid results, and what safeguards are there in this test to assure that those results are valid, other than cross-checking?
Now, if it helps, I have copies of the MMPIs, the demonstrative profiles, and the for the state, for the defense, and for
Judge, if you could step down and put them on the overhead projector.
you want these, Your Honor?
Second. Yes, sir. I'll take it.
Your Honor, I have no objection to Dr. Berland using the raw data of Mr. Bargo's MMPI, but I would object to him using any other visual aid, because that was the only thing that's been provided to the state, was Mr. Bargo's MMPI.
I'm not sure if I understand the objection.
Well, he needs to be able to use demonstrative aids that won't be in evidence to explain the significance of the MMPI
I'm going to
result.
overrule the objection.
Thank you.
Grant the request to have Dr. Berlin step down.
Your Honor, may we have a copy of what it is that he intends to
I
use?
gave them a copy, I thought.
I gave you a copy. Bill.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Got a switch on that thing. Just if I could just stand aside so I don't block the screen here.
Yes, sir.
Just take it
Actually,
into
that
account.
podium
It's on.
probably needs to be moved also.
But Ms. Hawthorne is going to assist him in placing this.
That's fine.
Otherwise, they'll get busy.
That's fine.
All right, as I said, the MMPI was originally developed as a group from a pool of a bunch of items. And thank you.
Okay, could you identify what this first document is?
This is a demonstrative profile of the original MMPI, which is scored a little differently than the new MMPI, the MMPI-2. The MMPI-2 is the only one of its kind, the only test that has a cutoff of 65 instead of 100. Now,
And when you say demonstrative exhibit, what do you mean by that?
this is to give you an idea of how the MMPI works. This was chosen because it showed a clear psychosis, scale 8, the third from the end. I'm going to try to point. Right there is very high. This was somebody who had very minor charges. I think he had defrauding an innkeeper, and he was going to be set free when he went back to jail, so he had no reason to fake.
Now, I'm just going to object to the relevance of the MMPI of random people that Dr. Berlin has come in contact with
You know, my
before.
response to that is this. If we don't place the MMPI in some sort of context, it is worthless, and they've got to know that. We have to use demonstrative things to show what different readings would be. These are not the readings of Michael Bargo. Clearly, the jury can understand it. These are demonstrative exhibits to educate them on this MMPI so they will understand the results and the actual results coming.
The objection is overruled.
Continue, sir.
All right, now, this person was very depressed and suicidal. You can see scale 2. The depression scale right here is elevated. Now, the center line is, the center horizontal line right here is the average number of deviant responses. That's what you count, is the number of deviant responses for each of the scales. There are 10 clinical scales and 3 what are called traditional validity scales. They tell you whether the person is answering honestly or attempting to appear more or less disturbed than they actually are.
So is that one of the internal safeguards of this thing?
Yes,
To assure a valid result?
correct. In any case, this person had a psychotic disturbance F, measures a bunch of different symptoms of mental illness, and the higher it is, the more severe their disturbance is. Now you can convert the raw scores on L, F, and K are different from one another. And you can convert them so you can compare them to a T-score of from 50, which is the average number of deviant responses given by the normal population, and this is the extremes of the normal range. So this person was clearly outside the normal range of symptoms of mental illness. Ready for the next profile. This one.
The second profiles that you're showing.
This is the same guy 2 months later after having injectable antipsychotic medication. So the MMPI showed that everything came down. He still had some residual symptoms, and obviously scale 4, which is called the psychopathic deviant scale, it measures both psychotic symptoms and character disorder. So he was con before he was medicated and a con afterwards. And the MMPI showed the difference.
What kind of medication did they use to produce this result?
He was on Prolixin decanoate, injectable form, long-acting injectable form of medication.
Was he on any other medication when this first one was MMPI?
No. He was on no medication when the first one was done, and he was only on Prolixin when this one was done.
So in terms of real life, what were the changes in this person that would be visibly observed to just a casual?
He was no longer suicidal. Golly, that was so long ago. He was no longer suicidal, and he was no longer psychotic, which means he had no delusions. The hallucinations and delusions were controlled at the time. Okay, ready for the next one. This one. Now this is to give you an idea of how extreme a profile can get and still be a genuine representation of mental illness. This person had a very minor charge, and we knew he was going to walk, but he was in steel arm and leg restraints for 2 years prior to us reading this to him, and we had to read it to him because when we tried to give it to him, he tried to eat it. So you can see his F score is very high, and his scale 8, the schizophrenia scale, is very high, but he was not very depressed, nor was he a character disturbance. So you can see that this profile gives you an idea of how severe somebody can be and still be a valid profile.
So what this test does, it helps you in identifying the specificity of various psychological aspects of someone enough to be able to identify what's wrong, which may be extreme versus things that are within the normal range, right?
Correct.
And that's a graphic representation.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah, this graph represents the number of deviant responses that they've given on each of these scales, and then it's scored, and they're counted the number of deviant responses they've given. Okay, I'm ready for the next one. I have 3 samples of people who admitted to faking to me, and you can see it
Now
goes
explain what that medical term is, faking, for the jury. Explain what that means.
malingering. They're trying to pretend they have symptoms of mental illness they don't really have in order to change their progress through the criminal justice system.
Now, this test, right, this particular example is what the internal safeguard is, and explain exactly how that works. You can tell whether someone's malingering or faking or lying.
Well,
What do you want to call it?
this person was out and out faking, and he admitted it. His F score is not only goes off the top of the graph, it goes off the top of the page. And his scale 8 score. There are many more items on each of these scale 8 and scale F than there are allowed on the graph. And so if they score, I used to, when I first started doing this and was detecting maligners, I used to tape pieces of cardboard to the back of the page to score these things. And you interpolate. You
Find that term, interpolate.
you well, in this case, it means you find out how much distance there is between the regular items, and you go upward above what the last item that is on the scale until you reach a level that is equal to where they score. All right, I have 2 more examples. If you want to just lay it on top, that's fine. These people, again, and you can stick the third one on there. These people all admitted that they were faking. And you can see their scores go off the top of the graph and off the top of the page. So that's visually what a regular, what a fake and regular profile look like. Now we have.
I might this be.
This is Mr. Bargo Jr. And this is his profile, and you'll notice the cutoff is at 65 instead of 70. Now, the test is identical to the original MMPI, the demonstrative profiles that I showed you, except that the cutoff on that one was 70 and the cutoff on this one is 65.
So what's the practicalities of that? What's the significance of that?
Just that they had some sampling problems and decided that it didn't work unless you lowered the cutoff. So, but he was clearly well above it on scale 6, which is the paranoia scale, and scale 8, which is the schizophrenia scale. So he had symptoms of psychosis. Now, Dr. Wood, who talked about partial complex seizures, could be correct, but everything I have points to mental illness. So I'm going to talk in terms of mental illness.
And that's because you're not a qualified expert in the field of neurology, correct?
Correct.
So what you're going to be looking at is the psychological manifestations of the problem was, rather than the neurological possible origins that Dr.
Correct.
Wu talked about, correct?
Now, I interviewed his mother the other night over the phone, and she said that he had...
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Anyway, there were things that could be part of, that were in the record.
That's a result of the interview.
That's a result of the interview.
Of the interview with his mother. What conclusion did you reach, or how did you support a conclusion?
Well, it supported the partial complex seizures because he was said to have, now they needn't...
Objection is sustained regarding hearsay.
In your evaluation, did you find evidence, without saying what someone said, of complex seizures?
Yes, I did.
Can you explain what complex seizures are as opposed to regular seizures?
Well, they look like, and they're often misdiagnosed as mental illness, and there needn't be what's called a post-ictal period of confusion after the seizure. They get sleepy or confused. People who have seizures, normally big convulsive grand mal seizures, for instance, are sleepy afterwards or dazed or confused. With partial complex seizures, they needn't be, they needn't have a post-ictal dazed period.
Okay, so when we're talking about this, let's break that down so we all understand it. In other words, we're thinking about seizures like, for example, what we commonly know as a seizure. Somebody falls out of the restaurant, they're shaking it for the
Correct.
object.
The grand mal seizure.
Right. That's different than the type of seizure you're talking about.
Correct.
There's not the physical observations of the shaking or anything like that.
That's correct.
And what's going on?
That's correct.
Where is the seizure?
The seizure is still electrical activity in the brain, but it's manifested as behavior. Like, for instance, there's a type of seizure, an old type of seizure called episodic dyscontrol, where the person jumps on the bed and holds their ears and screams. but they don't ever have any ictal or seizure-related symptoms. They don't shake or convulse or any of
In
that
other words,
stuff.
we wouldn't see this with the naked eye because it's all going on in the brain, correct?
Correct. Now, there were things in the record that supported it. For one, they put him on Dilantin. I never found a diagnostic issue as to why they put him on Dilantin, but they put him on 300 milligrams of Dilantin.
What is Dilantin normally used for?
It is, unlike some other anti-seizure medications, which are used also as mood stabilizers, like Depakote and Lamictal and Tegretol. My experience, at least, is that phenytoin or Dilantin is used only for seizures. And he was on 300 milligrams of Dilantin
When was he on 300 milligrams?
in
of
the
Dilantin?
jail.
How long was he on it for?
I don't have any idea.
Do you have any idea why that was prescribed for?
No, I never could find a diagnostic explanation. But it suggests that they thought he had a seizure disorder as well.
Likewise, you have reviewed medical records, correct?
Correct.
And those medical records support the idea or the notion of what was prescribed, that he was having certain problems like that, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
He was also prescribed Seroquel, which is an second generation antipsychotic medication. And the therapeutic dose range for Seroquel is 400 to 800 milligrams a day, and he was getting 400 milligrams according to the record.
So you would consider that significant?
Yes.
Why?
Well, if he was getting it and he could tolerate it, then, now I'm assuming they checked for cheeking, I don't know. I couldn't
Explain
tell.
what cheeking is.
Cheeking is where they take the medicine and they pretend that they're swallowing it, but they don't, and they spit it out. They hold it. Cheeking is a term that's used generically for taking the medicine and not admitting that you're not really taking it. You spit it out afterwards.
Now, these doctors at the jail, they are doctors, correct?
Yes.
They got like a little infirmary there and also
Yes.
a medical pod. And they have medical equipment all the way from dentistry to minor surgery, I suppose.
Well, they usually send people out for surgery.
But these are licensed doctors,
Yes.
practicing and licensed. in
I think the
Florida,
law
correct?
requires that they be licensed.
Just want to make that clear. And they are.
Yes, and they're not necessarily psychiatrists. Many of them are Hispanic and formerly gynecologists, but they prescribe in the jails and treat people.
But they obviously know what drugs and what.
Yes, they're supposed to. All right.
What else do you know is significant?
Well, he had a lot of delusional paranoid thinking. This was not
Let me
fake.
stop you on that. What is delusional paranoid thinking? How does
Well,
it manifest itself?
Delusional paranoid thinking means that you have a view of the world where you feel vulnerable to things that other people don't feel vulnerable to. And it's been well established in the medical literature that psychosis, which is what I think he suffers from, is biological in nature, which is why, and it can be the result of brain injury or inheritance or some combination of the two. The most common scenario is an inherited predisposition, which is potentiated by a head injury, and he reported, for better or for worse, a series of head injuries to me.
What about genetically? Would this be genetic?
There's at least a genetic predisposition, I think, yes.
Now, how do you say there's a genetic predisposition in this case? What research did you do or test did you do to try to confirm that?
Well, I looked at his dad and I talked with his grandmother about his grandfather, who was hospitalized repeatedly for mental illness. And the first generation, after someone is found to be mentally ill, has a much higher proportion of likelihood for being mentally ill. So the father is likely mentally ill.
You the grandfather or the father?
The father of the defendant.
And did you run any tests on the father of the defendant?
Yes, I did.
What were those results?
He had a series of head injuries, so it was hard to tell that he had a genetic history. So he proved to be psychotic. The father as well.
So even Michael Bargo's father is psychotic.
I think so. Yes.
Did you actually run an NFPI on him?
Yes.
You got it? All right. Elucidate on this for us.
Well, L, which is one of the validity scales, there was research published about almost 30 years ago, 28 years ago, on a forensic population, but they found that these kinds of symptoms are biological in origin, and
What do you mean by biological origin?
that something in the brain misfunctioning is what causes these symptoms. And a score of 6 or more on L, usually, even if everything else, even if the clinical scales are all in the normal range, is related to delusional paranoid thinking. So his father had a score of 6, as you can see, and 6 or more on L. L is items where we don't want to admit to things that we all experience, like sometimes I feel angry, sometimes I feel like hitting someone, sometimes I feel like cussing, but delusional paranoid people will say no to 6 or more of those usually. And so they found that even, and I've had hundreds of cases like that since then. But he, in spite of it, had what we call leakage. In spite of his efforts to hide mental illness, he was significantly high on scale 6, which is delusional paranoid thinking, and he was above the cutoff on scale 8, which is schizophrenia scale, which is all different kinds of psychotic symptoms. There are 3 kinds of symptoms that define psychosis: thinking problems, perceptual problems, most often in the form of hallucinations, and biological, or what's called endogenous mood disturbance, so that people have episodes of mania or episodes of depression that are not brought on by things going on around them.
In other words, it's not situational factors.
Correct.
It's like a cycling of the brain.
Correct. Or they may have what's called inappropriate affect. I've had some patients when I worked in Chattahoochee who talked about their beloved mother dying, and they laughed while they talked, but it was what was called inappropriate affect. They were psychotic at the time, and they weren't evil or didn't care about their mother. They just couldn't help it because their brain didn't work right.
Now, you mentioned a place called Chattahoochee. What is that?
That is the oldest state hospital in Florida, and I worked there for 7 years back many years ago in the forensic service at Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee. At the time, they had 1,800 beds. Now I think they have 1,000, most of which are forensic. And
What do you mean by forensic?
forensic means that people have some involvement with the legal system, in this case, the criminal justice system.
That would be like people that were declared incompetent for trial, etc.
Incompetent, not guilty by reason of insanity, mentally disordered sex offenders, and we had a few transfers in the old days from the prison who were too mentally ill to manage in the prisons.
Now, you're not saying by this, in your expert opinion, you're not saying Mr. Bargo is insane,
No,
correct?
sir.
Can you explain exactly what you're saying?
I'm saying he suffers from a biological mental illness that I think he has a genetic predisposition toward, and brain injury has probably enhanced the symptoms. Brain injuries, too. You can have a series of injuries, each of which does not produce symptoms of brain injury, but they add together and produce a significant brain injury, or in this case, significant mental illness. And so, for instance, many times people will go to the emergency room with a head trauma, and they'll be given a neurological exam and cleared, but a neurological exam, except for whether they're oriented, and I've seen people with half their brain missing who are oriented, they check for things that are controlled by the interior of the brain, and so the outside of the brain, the cortex, which is where most mental illness lies, may be damaged and it won't show up on a neurological exam.
And when you're talking about the cortex, what do you mean, the cortex being damaged? What part of the brain is that?
The outermost part of the brain, the part that slaps against the skull when somebody hits something like a windshield, for instance.
So where do we find the injury?
Well, that's why we use things like PET scans instead of MRIs or CT scans, because they only show the shape or physical structure of the brain, and the brain is made of a gelatinous material. And the analogy I like to use is like this round sponge you wash your car with. If you push in on it and then let go, it pops back out and resumes the normal shape, so that the shape isn't changed, but the way the tissue at the site of the injury functions is changed. And that's where the PET scan and some other things come in. Diagnosis, it used to be called manic depressive psychosis. I think he's probably at most a schizoaffective, which is the same thing, only it's inherited. I think you can get a pattern very much like a bipolar from brain injury, and so I think that brain injury was at least a factor in intensifying his. People who are mentally ill lead a high-risk lifestyle, and so they get hit in the head or have, you've heard of shaken baby syndrome, I call it brain slosh, whereas the brain, they don't actually hit anything, but if the brain is, damaged, because it sloshes against the skull and you get coup and contra coup injuries.
Mr. Holman, may Dr. Berlin retake the witness stand? Retake the witness stand, sir.
So you were saying coup and contra coup injuries. What does that mean?
Well, that's what they call where the brain sloshes, essentially, and it hits the part of the head where the first forward motion takes it, and then it rebounds because it's made out of a gelatinous material, and its contra coup is the injury on the opposite side of the head. So if they get hit on the side here, they get coup and contra coup.
Now let me ask you the tough question. Having given that testimony, what your expert opinion is, how, as far as the profile you have for him goes, how could this have contributed to his thought patterns on that day that this crime occurred?
Well, people tend to be kind of irritable and explosive, and that's frequently misdiagnosed as a mood disturbance, when in fact it's related to delusional paranoid thinking. And so I think that the irritability and feeling that he needed to protect himself, that he was vulnerable to things that other people aren't subject to, contributed to.
So in other words, his medical condition was not the process of rational thought on this occasion, is what you're saying, right?
Correct. It would be like being angry at him for having diabetes. I mean, the analogy is very accurate.
So they might find justification in cases where there was no justification as a result of their mental illness, correct?
Say that again, please.
They might engage in acts and justify those acts in that rage or whatever it was when there is no real justification for their actions by normal standards, correct?
Correct.
As a direct result of their mental illness.
Correct.
Your Honor, I tender the witness for cross-examination.
Cross-examination.
Dr. Berlin, surely you're not saying that the defendant, Michael Bargo, couldn't help but kill Seth Jackson?
No, I'm not saying.
Now, you talked a lot about the MMPI. Let me ask you some questions about that. That is a test, I think you said has been in use since 1938?
The original one was in use from 1938, and then the MMPI-2, which I use, which is a little more user-friendly, has been since 1989.
And so all those demonstratives that you used were not results of the MMPI-2, they were results of the MMPI-1.
Correct.
And they date back prior to 1989 then?
Yes. Now, one of the experts with the MMPI and the MMPI-2 said that they are clinically and statistically equivalent, so that the MMPI is not considered out of date anymore.
Now, the MMPI is a series of true and false questions.
That's correct.
Right. In about 567 questions on the MMPI too.
I only used the first 370, which form the basic validity and clinical scales.
So you don't use the other almost 200 questions.
That's correct.
Right. And the MMPI is what's known as a standardized test.
That's correct.
Okay. And the purpose in your field of a standardized test is that so you can administer it and compare the results you get from one individual to standard or normal results.
Population.
To the population. Yes,
That's
sir.
correct.
All right. And
That's what this graph does. It compares their scores with the population as a whole.
all right. You've already indicated you gave the test to the defendant verbally.
That's correct.
And you indicated that a group of people say that it should not be given verbally.
Correct.
This group of people is actually the people that developed it and experts in the field throughout the years.
They are not the people who developed it. The people who developed it have long since passed away. One was a psychiatrist, Charlie Hathaway, and McKinley. I can't remember now. One was a psychologist and one was a psychiatrist, McKinley and Hathaway.
But accepted authorities regarding the MMPI say specifically that the clinician should refrain from administering the MMPI-2 by reading the items aloud because this practice is a significant change from the standardized administration and its effects are unknown.
That's what they say, but the test is very robust.
And the test that's designed to be read by the person who's taking it and answered by them.
Or by a secretary, correct.
And it's a test of 567 questions.
No, it's a test of, they even have a line they draw in the book, the booklet. In the introductory one I got recently at Department of Corrections, they had a line under 370, item 370, so that produces, the first 370 items produce the traditional clinical and validity scales.
But you would admit, doctor, if you have a standardized test that's supposed to be administered in a standard manner, that you break standardization when you go away from the way it is designed and instructed to be administered.
You break standardization, yes.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the validity and clinical scales that you discussed. One of the validity scales that you talk about or that you testified about is the F scale.
Correct.
All right, and that was extremely high on Mr. Bargo.
Yes.
Right. In fact, with the results that you got on those validity scales, most professionals looking at that would say that this is an invalid test that can't be relied upon, would they not, Dr. Berland?
Probably most professionals would, but they're not that familiar with the MMPI. They also use 2-point codes.
Okay. But most professionals would look at that test and say it is not a valid test and cannot be relied upon in reaching conclusions.
That's correct.
Now, I believe you indicated that you didn't make a specific diagnosis of the defendant in this case, like a DSM diagnosis.
That's correct.
Now, what is the DSM, Dr. Berland?
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, we're on Roman numeral 4 right now, and we're about to proceed to 5. And they vote on whether something should be a diagnosis or not.
And who is they? Who vote?
The people who are chosen to revise the standards.
And this is representatives of the field of psychology.
Of psychiatry.
Psychiatry, excuse me.
Yes.
All right. And it is, I mean, that is a learned treatise that's treated as pretty much a Bible for psychologists and psychiatrists.
The codes are used by, the codes for diagnoses are used by insurance companies to pay, and it is considered a learned treatise, yes.
But you don't hold with the diagnoses in the DSM.
No, there's First of all, if you look at the records of people who've been in different hospitals, they always say different diagnoses for every hospital. And there's research which shows that at least for the inherited disorders, the one track in the brain that controls the mental illness is disturbed. It's the same track for bipolar disorder and for schizophrenias and so forth. So a generic diagnosis is usually safer.
Safer. Right. Now, you talked about the defendant being prescribed Seroquel,
Yes,
and that was in the jail.
yes.
There's no indication that he was prescribed Seroquel prior to going to jail.
He said in his interview with another psychologist that he had been given Seroquel at a very small amount in a place before he was in jail, before he was arrested.
You've reviewed all the records of all those places, and there's no indication that the defendant was prescribed Seroquel.
I have not reviewed all the records.
I thought you told Mr. Holloman that you had reviewed all the records.
I was given them, but I haven't reviewed them all.
Okay. And you would agree, would you not, Dr. Berland, that that Seroquel that he was given in the jail was the lowest level of the therapeutic range?
Yes, but again, the threshold is very high, especially in a correctional facility. I know I work in one, for giving medicine of that sort, and it's very expensive too.
Right. And you talked about cheeking. And in fact, there is indication that Mr. Bargo, the defendant, was not taking the medication.
At least part of the time, that's correct.
In fact, he was found at one point in the jail with 9 Seroquel pills in his possession.
That's correct.
Now, the records that you reviewed did indicate that Mr. Bargo was diagnosed at a young age with ADHD.
Okay.
Well, I'm asking you, did you review that?
Yes,
All right. And there was that diagnosis.
that's correct.
5.2 million children in the U.S. between ages 3 and 17 are diagnosed with ADHD, are they not?
And some adults, that's correct.
And
It's the diagnosis of the month.
And the records you reviewed also indicated that, and we've heard testimony about the divorce,
That's correct.
and that he was in the home, and some of the results of the divorce on Mr. Bargo.
Yes, that's correct.
But it's true also, isn't it, Dr. Berland, that 40 to 50% of marriages in the United States end in divorce?
I wouldn't have any basis for disputing that.
And you testified that you work for the state at Union Correctional.
Correct.
Okay. And you've testified in a number of capital cases, have you not, Dr.
Yes.
Berland? How many?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I had stopped counting years ago.
All right. In excess of 50?
Probably, yes.
And in many of those cases, you testify at this stage about mitigating and aggravating factors.
That's correct.
Okay. And in each and every one of the cases in which you've testified regarding mitigating or aggravating factors, you've testified on behalf of the defense in support of mitigation, have you not?
If I understand your question correctly, in those cases in which I testified, the answer is yes.
Because you are philosophically strongly opposed to the death penalty, are you
No,
not?
that's not correct.
Okay.
Objection,
You
Your
ha-
Honor.
Sustained.
I move to strike that and have an instruction that the jury be told to disregard.
Your Honor, it would go to bias, just for the record.
Well, he denied that. Also, I'm going to instruct the jury to disregard the last answer by the witness.
Let me hear outside the presence of the jury, Judge.
Not right now, sir.
But Dr. Berland, in each and every case that you've testified in a capital case, it's been in support of mitigation.
That's correct.
I don't have any other questions.
Redirect.
Dr. Berlin, of course, we established the fact that you work for the state, too.
That's correct.
In point of fact, that's where you get your paycheck, that's right? And you've done psychological work for the state, primarily,
Yes.
haven't you? The majority of your work is with the state.
No, sir.
Where's the majority of your work?
Oh, you mean for the state of Florida?
The state of Florida.
Yes, that's correct.
And as a matter of fact, these officials back here, they've relied on your test before.
Yes,
They know the modalities of it, they know how it's set up and everything else, right?
I guess.
And they know how opinions differ in any field.
Correct.
Now, but you've had cases, have you not, where you found nothing wrong. In other words, it was in the normal ranges, right?
Yes.
And would you decline employment when that happened?
Well, I would just say I had no basis for testimony. I would do the evaluation, but I would not have any basis for testifying.
In other words, you wouldn't help.
Correct.
So what kind of idiot for a defense attorney would hire you in a situation like that? They wouldn't, would they?
Well, they pay you to do the evaluation, but not to testify.
So yes, there have been many times that you've testified for the defense, correct?
That's correct.
And I imagine there have been many times where you said that you could be of no help because of the results you found.
That's correct.
Everybody you evaluate is not crazy or incompetent, are they?
No, they're not.
As a state attorney's office or any other state official ever written you complained of the test, the way you administered it or anything
No,
like that?
sir.
As a matter of fact, there's a legitimate school of thought that says that reading the test is preferred over actually you asking the questions is preferred over the reading of it, isn't there?
Well, it's not a school of thought.
Okay.
It's
Use your description then.
it's just a small group of people that I get an almost zero refusal rate, as opposed to people who just hand them the booklet and I'll ask that they be locked in a room alone. They get a 15 to 20% refusal rate. So that's one reason why I read it to them. I've also just found that people are more likely to respond to it accurately than not just Christmas tree it, which means just random answers, if you read it to them and you do all the work for them.
Now, don't you have to determine whether or not they could even read or read accurately before you give them a test to read?
Yes, I used to do that. I used to have them read and define items for me, certain items.
But you found a lot of people would be embarrassed by at their level of reading, didn't you?
Well, and I just found the refusal rate to be intolerable because I relied very heavily on the MMPI.
Do you have any doubts as to your diagnosis being correct within the degree of medical expertise that you have?
No, because I found that the symptoms that he reported to me appeared to be accurate in the interview, and they corresponded those with a different method, and I used multiple methods from the testing, and both of them indicated a psychotic disturbance, as did the records that I reviewed. The threshold is very high for prescribing Seroquel, for instance, and to give him 400 milligrams is astonishing to me.
And in fact, you did more than that because of the dearth of records that were given to you. You reviewed the majority of those, correct?
I did not. I never got a chance to, I'm afraid.
You did review records of it?
Yes.
And you found family support for that, correct?
Yes.
And you talked to various members of the family, you talked to the grandfather? You learned about the grandfather, right?
That I talked to the grandmother, but not the grandfather. He's deceased.
And you did the reports, or the test rather, on Mr. Bargo, the father,
Oh, yes.
and you found the same sort of thing, correct?
Correct.
And the grandfather did have a history of mental disturbances, did he not?
Apparently, yes.
Which directly contributed to his suicide.
I think so, but I wasn't there, so I don't know for sure.
Let's talk about cheeking for a minute, okay? Since they wanted to touch on that, let's touch on that again. Why would an inmate cheek?
If they wanted, in the old days, for instance, they were prescribed Sinequan, which is an antidepressant for sleeping, and if you take the capsules and shake them out over tobacco and smoke it, it makes you high, and so they would want to sell the drugs, or they would want to give them to other people, or they'd want to take them at a different time.
Or they want to commit suicide?
Or they'd want to commit suicide, correct.
Did you find in his history that Mr. Bargo had a history of trying to commit suicide?
There were a couple of,
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Overruled.
in the records, it indicated that there were a couple of times where he had suicidal ideation, which is typical of someone who has a partial complex seizure disorder, apparently. I didn't know that before this case.
So everything you found basically points to you being correct.
That's correct.
To another witness.
Recross.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Berliand, Mr. Bargo had no trouble reading.
No, ma'am.
No intelligence issues that you could determine.
No, ma'am.
Right. And the test that you gave to the defendant was in July of 2012.
That's correct.
And you would agree that when he was first arrested in April of 2011, he was seen by a psychologist at the jail, or psychologist or psychiatrist.
I don't recall, but apparently.
Right. And that review indicated there was no signs of psychosis,
I have no reason to dispute that.
no signs of schizophrenia,
Again, I have no reason to dispute that.
that he reported no hallucinations.
Well, and I know, for instance, there will be other experts who will say, or who have said, that there's nothing wrong with him, and he reported hallucinations to them.
Okay. But reported no hallucinations on April 21st of 2011, the day he was arrested.
I have no reason to dispute that.
No delusions.
No reason to dispute that.
His cognition was normal.
Again, same answer.
Denied any suicide attempt.
He wasn't going to admit that there was anything wrong with him.
I don't have any other questions.
May this witness be excused, counsel? Mr. Holloman. Further examination.
Are you familiar that there's also jail reports to the contrary of that?
Later, he was prescribed Seroquel, which said he was psychotic. It's a second-generation antipsychotic.
Might someone present themselves as psychotic at one moment, but then at other times feel, when you're looking at them or talking to them, they don't appear to be?
Oh, absolutely. We used to do something at the Chattahoochee called the Baker Act hearings, and people would be drinking their urine on the wards and would come down and pull it together in front of the hearing officer, and thank heavens he knew me and trusted me, and he would recommit them, and they were just as disturbed as they could be, but they could pull it together.
But they presented very well at the moment, correct?
Correct.
His psychosis, do you have any indication, as the state would seem to suggest, that he'd be faking that or something like that? That he could fool that test?
I don't think he could, but that's just me. I've used it for years and years and hundreds of times, and I couldn't fool it. So the
Particularly in light of the history that you researched with the family.
and the nature of the records from the jail. That's correct.
No further questions?
Anything further, Ms. Arnold?
No, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused, counsel?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Arnold? You're excused, sir.
Thank you.
Counsel, approach the bench, please. Thank you.
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief recess. We'll make it simply approximately 15 minutes. We'll reconvene at, we'll make it 11:30. Thank you. Noting that the jury has retired from the courtroom. Mr. Holloman, you have no further testimony to present, is that correct?
Let's get them in. All right. Judge, we'd like to, of course, subject them to look at it. Make sure they see the right thing, the jail record.
My question was, do you have any testimony to present?
No, sir.
Does the state have rebuttal witnesses? Just one? I think we might need to take a lunch recess then, and
Judge, I agree. I think I know who they're going to call, and cross-examination might be extensive.
yes, sir.
Those are the ones that you gave us the other day.
Ms. Arnold, did you receive a copy of the defense proposed jury instructions?
I have not seen them, but yeah, they're right here. I don't know if Ms. Burnt had a chance to look at
If
them
you'll
or not.
just look at them during the lunch recess. What we'll do is we'll reconvene at 11:30. I'll advise the jury how we're going to proceed.
I mean, it is a business record. I don't,
They may-
I don't know that, I mean, they did get a business record certification, so I'm not necessarily stipulating to it
Judge,
because,
it would qualify. They weren't made in time and place of litigation.
You want to offer it into evidence?
I would offer them that.
Let me see this.
I'd also like to announce to the jury that they've been accepted in evidence, if they are.
I will announce that the composite exhibit 5, Roman numeral 5, Michael Shane Bargo Jr., Marion County Jail medical records will be received in evidence as defense exhibit 18. I can announce that to them when they return. I apologize.
no, we do object to the photographs, and we'll need to discuss that because
Well, let's
we
discuss
weren't
it.
provided any of the, and Ms. Burnt's not here, so I would ask that we wait until,
It's composite exhibit V. I misspoke. It was not Roman numeral 5. It is exhibit V as in Victor. I'll announce the admission into evidence regarding that exhibit when the jury returns. I actually want to look at it. It will be in recess till 11:30.